After months of investigating FemTech companies, I uncovered a dark pattern. The exploitation of women's most sensitive health data, misleading marketing claims, broken promises, and a shocking lack of accountability. It left me questioning everything. If these practices are accepted across the industry, what hope is there for the future of women's health technology? I set out on a mission to answer one question. Does ethical femtech actually exist? To find the answer, I'm travelling 16,000 kilometres to the other side of the world to meet with a femtech company that appears to be doing things very differently. This trip is not sponsored. It's part of my own research, my own journey, and my own mission to bring women the truth. My research led me to a woman named Ida Tin, the co-founder of Clue. Nearly a decade ago, she coined the term FemTech. By naming this sector of the tech industry, she gave women's health technology visibility and recognition, legitimizing it as worthy of investment and innovation, while also highlighting the unique care that FemTech requires, and drawing a line against the tech industry's Wild West pursuit of growth at all costs. Yet my investigation revealed that too many femtech companies confuse which sector they belong to, making bold claims to drive user acquisition and blurring the line between innovating for women's health and turning users into the product. With regulatory loopholes and lack of accountability, it's easy to build something that looks empowering while following the old tech playbook of growth above all else. Which is what brings me here, to Berlin. But why Berlin? Berlin itself is a really important part of this story. On the surface, it's a city of art, history, and reinvention. But underneath, Berlin carries a memory that lives on in the pulse of the city. Germans are among the most privacy-conscious citizens in the world, and Berlin is a city that knows the cost of surveillance. The city has lived through two authoritarian regimes, first the Nazi Party, then the East Germany secret police, the Stasi. Both collected and abused personal information as a weapon. So today in Berlin, privacy is not just treated as a preference, it's a deeply ingrained right. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the city has grown into a hub for digital rights activism. Groups like the Chaos Computer Club, Europe's largest and most influential digital rights collective, continue to shape the culture today. Europe also has the strictest privacy laws in the world, and here your health data is classed as sensitive. Apps can't just collect and sell your information, they need clear and explicit consent. And now with new AI laws, any health app needs to be explainable, transparent, and accountable to humans. By contrast, in America, tech culture relies on venture capital, which demands growth above all else. Weak regulation allows health data to be treated like a commodity, with entire business models built on turning personal information into profit. In Berlin, health startups are uniquely supported, with grants, public funding, and accelerator programs that help young companies grow on their own terms, building trust into their products without selling off intimate data just to survive. As a fertility scientist and women's health advocate, I can't ignore how much these business foundations matter, because what's at stake is our trust, our most intimate information, and what that means for women's health and the future of our reproductive autonomy. Overall, Berlin is a city where activism, regulation, and creativity collide, creating the perfect ecosystem for rethinking how technology serves us. It's no accident that Berlin has a vibrant startup culture for technology and health innovation. If there's anywhere in the world that ethical femtech could take root, it's here. I'm on my way to meet Clue CEO Rhiannon for coffee before meeting the rest of the team. I've used Clue for 5 years, so to discover that you've done really well is really exciting to me.
It actually matters having a business that is sustainable, because then that's how you genuinely can guarantee that you're going to be there for the long run, that you can protect people's data, that you can do all the right things if you're around. The thing I like about subscriptions is it forces you to, you live or die by whether or not you're delivering enough value that people are willing to stick with you.
I had the privilege of spending 2 days inside the Clue office, getting to know the team who've helped shape how millions of women understand their bodies. It was a rare opportunity to see how a leading FemTech company navigates data, ethics, and innovation from the inside. As someone devoting my life to advocating for women's health, this experience was deeply personal to me. I had the opportunity to sit down with Clue's CEO, Rhiannon, their head of science, Cornelia Hainer, and their director of data, Linda Sen, to ask the questions I've been exploring on this journey. The clips you're about to see are just some of the questions and the highlights from the full interviews. What does Clue exist to do in your own words?
So Ida Tin, our founder, founded Clue because she was really frustrated that you could do so much with technology, and yet the most basic thing in terms of understanding our core biology you couldn't do. And so for her, it was really about building a tool that would enable women to track and understand their cycles and really empower them. And the way I think about it in terms of what we do and what the product does, if you like, the core thread through Clue is tracking equals data, data equals insight, and insight equals agency. And that's just what everyone at Clue, from Ida through to everyone who works there, we just want women to have agency in terms of their health, the choices they want to make around their health, understanding their bodies and themselves.
Why does scientific oversight matter so much in FemTech development?
Scientific oversight is essential when developing products in the FemTech space, because it is about people's bodies, it is about their health, and it is about decisions that they may make that impact their physical well-being or emotional well-being or reproductive health. So I think building products in the FemTech space really comes with a huge degree of responsibility, and we take that very seriously. And we also know that those users, they put a lot of trust into those products, right? And you can see that because of all this very personal and very intimate data that they track in those apps and that they share with us. If we would not have this level of scientific input into those products, there is a risk of building unreliable products or unregulated products or inaccurate products. So having this level of scientific oversight, I think that really matters to make sure that the features that we build are evidence-based and are safe to use.
So scientific oversight is important for making sure that the tool is able to do the job that it claims to do.
Exactly, yeah. And there is no risk associated with this, right? Because before we launch any feature, we have to double check a couple of things. And one of them is like, is there anything that could be misunderstood or misused? And then lead to confusion or misunderstanding or even to harm.
What does ethical FemTech look like when it comes to data?
Ethical FemTech means generally only processing data that is needed. You need to be also very transparent about how it is used and giving users a genuine choice and control. It's about respecting people's agency, but still maintaining a very meaningful way to provide insights.
What's something Clue prioritizes that you think often gets overlooked in FemTech?
Many people assume that FemTech is regulated and that it sits under a regulatory framework and umbrella, and it doesn't. Is the simple truth. Health data is very important and is very protected. Clue is based in Berlin and in the EU, so we're subject to the GDPR, which is the strictest and most thorough data protection regulatory framework in the world, and we're very grateful and proud to be operating in that framework. The wider usage of these sorts of products is not regulated in any way, so in fact people can make claims around what the products do without having to back those claims up. We don't think that's right, and we think that because we are dealing with sensitive health data and we're dealing with people's health and information that is really personal and that is really important and that people can make big decisions based on, we think we should operate in a regulatory framework. So we are voluntarily registered as a Class 1 medical device in the EU, which means that we can be subject to being audited. We are regularly audited, and we have to be able to document and demonstrate everything that we do in terms of how we develop the app, why we make the decisions we do, how everything flows through from a user need through to a solution in people's hands, and how we treat and manage everything through the company. So not, yes, the data, that's really important, but everything else as well. How do we onboard people so that they understand what the importance and the criticality of what they're working on? How do we make sure that there's a clear traceability around our suppliers and the people who work with us, because we can't do everything on our own? How do we make sure that we are really clear and transparent around our financial framework as well, so that we have everything documented and transparent and visible?
You've hit the nail on the head with everything that I have discovered along the way, which is exactly what has led me to Clue, and you are doing this in a space that doesn't force you to, and that's something I really admire.
We also think it's just good practice. You know, I often hear, especially in business and in tech, people talk about regulation like it's going to hamper you from doing what you want to do. And I actually don't think that's right. You know, when you look at the regulatory framework in the EU around the MDR, the medical device regulations, it's really actually really good basic practice. It's about transparency, it's about accountability, it's about documentation. And actually, if you're building a complex product that you want to put out into the world, these are all things that you need to do anyway, and they're actually good practice. I actually have a very firm view that the regulatory framework in the EU will mean that when it comes to the innovation opportunities around health tech in particular, we actually in a really good position, because the GDPR means that the way health data is treated is standardized, is highly regulated, highly protected. It means that people trust companies based in the EU with their data. And we can't innovate in health tech without data, but no one's going to give us the data if they can't trust us, quite rightly so. And so I actually think the EU is well positioned to sort of jump forward and push some of this innovation. And I think the regulation helps rather than hinders.
In your eyes, what does ethical femtech look like on a scientific level?
I think there is different considerations that should be taken into account. And one of them is, for example, transparency, to basically tell people what does the science say and what it doesn't say, make this differentiation clear. I would say another consideration is proper contextualization. Yeah, not just giving people a piece of information or a health insight that is based on their personal data, but also providing enough context for them to interpret this and to use it for their own benefit. So, for example, if a person is experiencing an atypically long cycle, we wouldn't just flag this. We would give enough context for them to get an idea of, okay, why could that be? Was there anything in my life that could have impacted my cycle length? And then also explain criteria that they can apply to then make a choice if they should go to a healthcare provider or not. So we're also suggesting next steps if something like this happens. Another consideration when it comes to ethical femtech, I think, is inclusivity. And as you know, we have more than 10 million monthly active users in the app, and each of them has a different life, right? They're living in different contexts, in different cultural environments. They are in a different life stage. They may have different health goals for what they're choosing to use a period tracking app. And all of this has to be taken into account when we're designing new features. And that might even be topics that are very sensitive to some people, right? So we really have to treat this carefully and keep all of those, the whole variety of users in mind when designing products.
A lot of apps market themselves as data encrypted, but I've noticed that the term is often used either incorrectly or in a misleading way. So what is something about data encryption that you wish more users would know?
I think encryption is very important, but it's not the whole story, right? So what really matters is a strong data governance, meaning that how your data is processed, who has access to it, and whether the company is actually transparent about the practice. The access to the data itself is also as important as the encryption itself, because if you have the key, you get access to everything. So yeah, I think that's the one that people tend to forget when they talk about data encryption.
In an industry that moves so quickly, what do you think often gets lost?
This is a great question. I think the human gets lost. So if you think about technology moves incredibly quickly, and at the moment it's moving even more quickly. You know, the advances in AI are exciting and scary and confounding and, you know, ambiguous. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And I think in technology, what gets lost is people get wrapped up in the technology, and they lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, it's always about building for other humans. And if we don't keep that in mind, then what's the point? So really keeping in mind that it's people at the other end of what we're building is the thing that I think is so important. I think folks who work in technology, it's an exciting place to be, and we have to remember that it's all in the service of people.
I've noticed a lot of apps claim to be science-backed but don't actually employ a scientific or a medical team. So from your perspective, what does science-backed actually mean and how is Clue different?
I think being science-backed or science-based is not only about citing a few research studies here and there, it's really about integrating a certain way of scientific thinking or a scientific mindset into all of the work that we're doing at Clue. And this can, for example, be applied to our product and product development, where the science team is really involved and our expertise is really flowing into the whole process of product development, from the early scoping and conceptualization of a new feature until the launch of this feature. And also into our product, we're including scientific research and current medical guidelines, and also into the content that we write. And then being science-based to us also means that we are doing research ourselves. So, and this is something that we do research in different ways. So we do research on our product, for example, to validate the efficacy of our product. Does it really help people achieve health goals, or is it really beneficial? And how do people use our app to get those benefits, so that we can always develop our product further into the direction that is really beneficial to our users. And then we're also doing research in collaboration with a lot of researchers who work at renowned academic research institutions. At the moment, we have more than 40 of those research collaborations. And this research is then also published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. So we also share the insights of that research. And most of those research collaborations are based on this huge data set that we have, that is based on the tracking data of our users. This huge data set carries such a huge potential. So it's a huge opportunity to help answer unanswered questions in women's health. I see this not only as a huge opportunity and potential of this data set, I also see this as our responsibility at Clue. Being science-based is not only like a hollow marketing term that we're using, but it's really something that is incorporated into all of the work that we're doing at Clue.
If you could give users one piece of advice to better understand their data rights, what would that be?
I think if I could give one piece of advice, it would be go beyond the buzzword. Paying attention on transparency and consent. Ask yourself these two questions. The first one is, does the company being clear about how they use and share data? The second one is your choice explained in a very fairly simple and easy to understand? When you know that answer, it actually tells you much more rather than any claim of a company, It's also knowing about when and how your data is actually being processed and whether you're comfortable with those terms.
How do you think consent architecture could be improved across the industry?
Well, consent should not be a one-time checkbox. It also has to be very granular, meaning for every single purpose of the data, you need to have a very granular consent and let user actually have the choices to, decide on what they want to share or not. And I think what company can still improve in this is to make it as plain language as possible, so people understand what they are actually sharing and what choices do they have.
Yeah, giving them options to opt in and out of certain practices, instead of just one consent. And what I have noticed when I've done research on some other apps is not only is the consent architecture not granular, you can't actually opt out of it. You have to just delete the whole app or just decide to not use the app. You have to consent in order to use the app, is what I've noticed.
I think the choices of changing your decision over time is also important.
What I really love about the granularity that you have, as well as the fact that you have a science team that's contributing towards research, is after spending time with the team and discussing a little bit more about what you're doing behind the scenes, it's empowered me to then actually opt in to science. Minimal data sharing is how I've always approached it. But after having these really insightful conversations, I get to choose if I want to meaningfully contribute towards something. And I love that that's something that Clue gives me the option to do. And it feels like I'm actually helping minimize the data gap that exists for women. And to me, that's really meaningful.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that.
If users could see behind the scenes, what do you hope they would notice about how their data is treated at Clue?
That's a very good question. I love this question very much, just so you know. I want them to see how much thought and discussions were put into every decision about privacy. They would see that protecting users is always prioritized and not just an afterthought, even though sometimes it means more complex and slower business decisions. I love these questions is because not only me that works in the data team, I think it speaks for everyone who works here at Clue, that finally there are someone actually asking, like about these questions.
Now that I'm home from this trip and I've had time to reflect, spending time with Clue has shown me what it means when a company really means what they say. It seems as though every step they take is centered around one question. What does this mean for our users? Not just as an idea, but in the details of how they design every feature, how they handle sensitive data, and how they collaborate between their departments. One of the biggest things I've learned through this journey is that data collection isn't the enemy. When it's done responsibly and ethically, it becomes a powerful tool, a way to serve women rather than exploit them. After speaking with Linda, I learned that the key is governance, integrity in the way that data is collected, protected, and used. It's about transparency and respect for consent and building systems that put women's interests at the center. I've just finished reading the book Invisible Women, which explores the gender data gap across all areas of life. And we've all lived with the realities of the women's health data gap, from delayed diagnosis to medical gaslighting and treatments designed without women in mind. Clue is helping to close that gap by building a meaningful, consent-driven way to collect and use data responsibly. So Clue is more than just a cycle tracking app. They actually empower women to contribute to important research that ultimately serves us through collaborations with universities and scientists working to ensure that we're no longer left out of the data. So my hope for the future of FemTech is that more teams commit to serving women for the long haul, putting care at the center and choosing integrity over shortcuts, and building values into their systems, not just their marketing. Clue is showing us all what is possible. Not perfection, because that currently remains undefined, but a commitment to transparency and responsibility even when no one is forcing them to. That's the example that I hope the rest of the industry carries forward. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me and sharing your attention. I would love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and until next time, take care.